Okay, this probably won't be that long. Mostly on this book. I've not finished reading it yet, but I'm past the uh, UN peacekeeping force being sent to Cambodia in the wake of the Vietnamese withdrawal. So, past what I will be talking about regarding the 1970s and 80s primarily, although I will start a little bit earlier to give some background information. So, this is The Lost Executioner by Nick Dunlap, who is or at least at the time of this writing, a British photographer, a year older than me, who's living in Bangkok, who sets out to find Comrade Doik, who was the head of S-21, or Tuol Sleng, converted school in Cambodia, in Phnom Penh, capital, that was used to interrogate, that is, torture, uh, suspected enemies, counter-revolutionaries within the Communist Party of Kampuchea, that is the Khmer Rouge, uh, during their reign. So they were in power from 1975 until the end of 1978. 25th of December 1978, the Vietnamese invaded and made very rapid progress. So by 1979, they had been pushed to the border with Thailand, and a new government installed in Cambodia, People's Republic of Kampuchea. Defectors from the Khmer Rouge, but basically a Vietnamese puppet state, but much more normal state than what the Khmer Rouge had instituted under Pol Pot and the people around him, Nguyen Chea, Kusam Phan, San Sen, Ieng Seri, where you had an extreme form of Maoism, and Maoism itself was very extreme in China, obviously, particularly during the Cultural Revolution, 1966 to 1969, and its aftermath, going all the way to 1976. So the Khmer Rouge were extraordinarily brutal. Excess deaths due to Khmer Rouge policies estimated at 1.7 million people out of a population of 8 million. So almost a quarter of the population perishing prematurely under the Khmer Rouge as a result of Khmer Rouge policies. Many of them physically executed, as were the people at Tuol Sleng. About 20,000 people were processed through that prison before being executed, and only 7 survived. But large killing fields elsewhere, a number of executions in the hundreds of thousands of people, and of course, people dying from malnutrition, exhaustion, disease under conditions of forced labor in various parts of the country during the reign of the Khmer Rouge. And of course, at the top, brother number one, it was later revealed, was Pol Pot, which was the revolutionary nom de guerre of Solif Sar. So the book by Dunlap, he's trying to track down and gives the history of the prison of Tuol Sleng under Comrade Doik, and very horrendous uh, goings on there, disturbing descriptions based upon primary source research of the tortures used, and then, of course, providing a greater political background. So it's kind of interesting, although disturbing, but I mean, I'm familiar with the basic outline of the history. So the Khmer Rouge came to power with the backing of the People's Republic of China, which was a model for the Khmer Rouge leadership, and North Vietnam. North Vietnam took a much more Soviet line for construction of socialism development, so much less extreme, much more similar to the states existing in Central and Eastern Europe under Soviet hegemony. And so, but the North Vietnamese backed the Khmer Rouge during the Vietnam War. The Ho Chi Minh Trail to supply the National Liberation Front, and then later the People's Army of Vietnam, operating in South Vietnam, area south of the 17th parallel. Supplied went through Laos and Cambodia, and the head of Cambodia until 1970, Prince Norodom Sihanouk, turned a blind eye to the North Vietnamese and NLF, the Viet Cong, using Cambodian territory to supply their forces in South Vietnam. And there was, in retaliation, a large-scale U.S. bombings of Cambodia, starting in 1969. Which is the year Ho Chi Minh dies, and is officially replaced by Le Don, although Le Don had been de facto effectively in control of North Vietnam for a while at that point, because Ho Chi Minh was quite old and sick. And there later U.S. incursions by land forces into Cambodia to try and interdict supplies from the Ho Chi Minh Trail to North Vietnamese and NLF forces operating in the territory of what was then the Republic of Vietnam, that is South Vietnam, the territory south of the 17th parallel from the 1954 partition after the French leave. So Cambodia had gotten independence under Prince Norodom Sihanouk the year before in 1953 and had been officially a neutral, as had Laos to the north. In 1970, when Prince Norodom Sihanouk was in China, there was a military coup by his number two man, Lon Nol, establishes a military dictatorship that is not neutral, that is openly pro-U.S. and anti-communist, seeks to root out both the Vietnamese communist forces, but also the Khmer Rouge, which had been developing in the 60s, and get a huge boost of support in the countryside as a result of the U.S. massive bombing campaigns in Cambodia starting in 1969. And when Norodom Sihanouk declares his support for the rebels fighting against Lon Nol, that is the Khmer Rouge, the Communist Party of Kampuchea, they get a much, much larger boost. So this is the year after the bombing starts in 1970. Sihanouk eventually puts a stamp of approval upon his former enemies, the Khmer Rouge, fighting in the countryside. He goes with his wife to quote-unquote liberated Cambodia that's not under the control of the Lon Nol government as part of basically a Khmer Rouge propaganda campaign. And of course, he is never restored to power by the Khmer Rouge. They instead take power themselves in 1975 on April 17th. They overthrow the Lon Nol government and occupy Phnom Penh and forcibly evacuate the city, forced march to the countryside, and there is large numbers of deaths involved in this and other policies of trying to basically make Cambodia into one giant forced labor rice growing commune. It's hard to explain. They abolish money. Everybody has to dress in black. You can't get married without permission from the party. Very much control over all aspects of life imposed by this extreme communist regime with Pol Pot, brother number one, and Nuon Chea, brother number two. But needless to say, hundreds of thousands of people executed on the pretext that they are counter-revolutionaries opposed to the new society and the uh, organization, which they call the Communist Party of Kampuchea. People worked to death on the farms to grow rice. And the Communist Party of Kampuchea breaks with the Vietnamese. Vietnam is an historical enemy of the Cambodians. They also break with the Soviet Union and its other allies. Vietnam, of course, after 1975, increasingly closer to the Soviet Union than China, and will eventually sign a treaty of friendship with the USSR and allow the Soviets to take over the US naval bases at Cam Bay, which they expand, and also Da Nang, although that is not as important strategically, since it remains much smaller than the Soviet naval base at Cam Bay. But anyway, the Soviet Union being far away and China being a traditional enemy of Vietnam, this makes sense. Le Don, even though at one time was considered pro-Chinese, that he would make the move to making Vietnam a member of the Soviet camp in opposition to China, and to have the Soviet model for economic development and political control rather than the Maoist model in China. So with this break, you start to see the Khmer Rouge accusing everybody of being a spy for the CIA or the KGB or the Vietnamese or all three at once. This frequently happened at Tuol Sleng. 20,000 people tortured, interrogated, forced to write confessions, and then executed under the auspices of Comrade Deutsch, who is, as I said, the focus of this book by Nick Dunlap. One of the things the Khmer Rouge do is they start to attack Vietnamese territory across the borders, attempt to reclaim it, and killing all the people there, mostly ethnic Vietnamese. A lot of ethnic Vietnamese had already been expelled out of Vietnam by the Lon Nol government, but those few remaining, most of them either killed or expelled by the Khmer Rouge, so the Vietnamese population in terms of ethnic minority is largely removed by force from Cambodia. Larger Cham Muslim minority suffers a disproportionate number of losses, in part because of their Muslim religion. Buddhist monks, of course, Buddhism being the majority religion in Cambodia, Theravada Buddhism in particular, are persecuted as well. The Buddhist temples and pagodas shut down or converted into for other purposes, including prisons and torture centers throughout Cambodia. The Chinese minority suffered disproportionate losses, about half their population, mostly in the urban areas, but is kind of more ambiguous. I know they're listed by Ben Kiernan as one of the minorities that suffered genocide, along with Thais, and of course the Cham and Vietnamese I've already covered. But a lot of the Khmer Rouge leaders, including Comrade Duch, are themselves uh, partially of Chinese descent. And so this, of course, would never happen for the Vietnamese, who were considered to be a complete and total enemy. Obviously, the main backer of the Khmer Rouge, both during their time in power and after their removal from power by the Vietnamese and their guerrilla struggle to try and recover power, their single largest backer and supporter is the People's Republic of China. And China had been kind of a model, but they took it up to 11. All right, so the Khmer Rouge basically took the great leap forward, the great proletarian cultural revolution, filtered it through austere form of Theravada Buddhist culture, and then kicked it up a notch. I think part of it uh, is a lot of the Khmer Rouge leadership were in fact these kind of lower level intellectuals, school teachers mostly. They were not proletariat. They were not peasants. They were not high level intellectuals. Uh, so you don't have kind of anybody with any feet in reality. These people had gone and got training in France, but they kind of lived in these kind of like little bubbles during the period of time that they become communist. They're still working as teachers under the rule of Prince Nordham Sihanouk, and then they take off to the jungles to fight in the guerrilla war. But from a fairly young age, all of these people I can tell in the high ranks of the Khmer Rouge, certainly Duch, but also Pol Pot himself, uh, in a bubble, not connected with any type of occupation. They would use their hands in. So they're not. They're not. This is ironic, of course, because they kill all the other intellectuals, including teachers, in Cambodia from 75 to 79. But these people were not themselves farmers or industrial workers, but they're also not high level intellectuals, mostly school teachers. So the Khmer Rouge, I said, probably set a record for killing percentage of the population under their control. 1.7 million people out of 8 million dying prematurely. And out of that number, many hundreds of thousands were physically directly executed, often very brutally, being beaten to death. They anger the Vietnamese, who had unified their own country shortly after the Khmer Rouge took power. North Vietnam takes Saigon on April 30th of 1975, and they invade Cambodia on 25th December 1978. So that's kind of the background. The Vietnamese get into Phnom Penh, they find Tuol Sleng, they find all the photographs on the wall, people admitted there and tortured. and it's forced to sign confessions before being executed. They come across huge numbers of mass graves, just piles of skulls in places, buried, various killing fields, and they create a memorial, uh, particularly at the prison in Tuol Sleng. It becomes a center after the Vietnamese leave of tourism from around the world. The original museum, established by the Vietnamese occupation, sent people to Poland, which was part of the Warsaw Pact at the time, so an ally with the USSR, to look at how they had done the Memorial Museum at Auschwitz. The Khmer Rouge, though, did not cease to exist, so they moved to the border regions. They were still upgrading in some the far western corners of Cambodia as a guerrilla force against the Vietnamese. But many of them moved into Thailand and they set up base in refugee camps. A number of the refugee camps in Thailand completely controlled by the Khmer Rouge, and they still have the extreme control over them, and there were still killings on a much lower level going on in these camps. And they are given massive assistance by not only the People's Republic of China, their traditional sponsor, who in fact attacks Vietnam in 1979. They lose badly. The Chinese, in a matter of mere weeks, lose more men fighting against Vietnam than the United States lost in the Vietnam War in 9 years of fighting. The Vietnamese military, battle hardened from fighting against the United States, has a defensive position. The Chinese using a lot more men in human wave attacks, fighting the last war, which was Korea for them, and losing badly. And the Vietnamese retaliate by expelling a large number of their ethnic Chinese population from the country, particularly those in the Chinatown in Saigon, which is renamed Ho Chi Minh City. In addition to the Chinese, of course, Thailand providing the land and the camps, the Thai military providing the camp protection, the Thai military and intelligence providing them with assistance to continue the fighting in Cambodia against the Vietnamese and the new Cambodian government, the People's Republic of Kampuchea. But also the United States and Great Britain. For instance, the SAS provides specialized training in what we would call terrorism to the Khmer Rouge. Also accompanies them in a number of missions as observers and advisors deep into Cambodia, all the way to Angkor. The United States, Great Britain, and the People's Republic of China make sure that the United Nations seat in is held by what is called the Coalition Government of Democratic Kampuchea, but it's dominated by the Khmer Rouge with elements of the old Lon Nol government, the KPNLF, Khmer People's National Liberation Front, and monarch still loyal to Sihanouk, the ANS. But it's basically a front for the Khmer Rouge. They continue to hold the UN seat, and the People's Republic of Kampuchea does not have UN membership, does not have membership in any other international or Asian organization, cannot get assistance from such international organizations such as the Asian Development Bank out of Manila in the Philippines. The Philippines is a member Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which include Thailand, Malaysia, and Singapore, all of which provide some military assistance and training. Well, of course, in the case of Thailand, the physical bases to the Khmer Rouge with the full backing of the United States, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and of course the People's Republic of China. Now, given the fact that the Khmer Rouge had made the Nazis in Germany look like nice guys, the support for the Khmer Rouge by the United States and Great Britain to fight against the Vietnamese military in Cambodia is, of course, not well publicized. It's kind of kept secret, but it's something that at the end of the 90s certainly had become well known. That policy originally established by Brzezinski, the national security head honcho for the Carter administration, also behind backing of the Afghan Mujahideen, and this continues under the Reagan administration, the military and diplomatic support of the Khmer Rouge against the People's Republic of Kampuchea and their Vietnamese sponsors, Vietnamese supporters, who are the bulk of the military force that the Khmer Rouge is fighting against. The Vietnamese army basically had its own Vietnam in Cambodia after the Vietnam War. They were fighting against more extremist communist guerrillas backed by China, and ironically, their former enemy, the United States, since we have decided this is a way to oppose Vietnamese power in Cambodia. So I'm going to wrap this up in about 30 minutes here. So eventually the Vietnamese will withdraw as the from Cambodia in the 90s. The communist bloc collapses. But the Khmer Rouge come back in, and they're a problem for a while. The UN has a huge peacekeeping force there to make the transition to a quote-unquote democratically elected government, although post People's Republic of Kampuchea still very corrupt, still very much a failed state in many ways as a result of what happened during the war when Sihanouk and Lon Nol were still in power, during the horrible mass murders under the Khmer Rouge regime, and then, of course, there is a period of about 10 years where they are militarily occupied by Vietnam with a guerrilla war fought by the Khmer Rouge to try and come back to power. All right, so I'll leave it at that. But in conclusion, we find that U.S. Foreign policy doesn't have much to do with morality. It's rehabilitation. As soon as they're overthrown by the Vietnamese of the Khmer Rouge to use as a weapon against the Vietnamese communists in alliance with the government of the People's Republic of China and the Kingdom of Thailand, shows that ultimately the U.S. government does not care about morality or human rights or any of these made-up terms but we do care about balance of power and particularly U.S. power. Um, so, I mean, from a point of view of most of the world, they were opposed to the Vietnamese because they were expanding at the time as far as official states in Africa and Asia. Only, I believe, India and the Soviet bloc uh, opposed the Khmer Rouge and supported the People's Republic of Kampuchea in the 1980s when it came for the annual credentialing of the seat for Cambodia, the Democratic Republic, the coalition government of Democratic Kampuchea. So, uh, but now, and this has been for a while, most people looking back would say, well, the Vietnamese stopped the mass slaughter. There was no telling when the mass murders, which were affecting more and more people, even within the Communist Party of Kampuchea, were going to end. Similar to Tanzania removing Idi Amin in Uganda. But I think there's some parallels with other cases, which I'm not going to mention. But certainly the United States collaboration with China and Thailand and Britain and other members beside Thailand of ASEAN to rearm, reform, train the Khmer Rouge to use against the Vietnamese with the full knowledge that if they're successful and come back to power, they would undoubtedly begin the mass slaughter again, is something to think about when we look at U.S. foreign policy. And I'll leave it at that. Hopefully, you all learned something. And I do recommend Nick Dunlap's book, The Lost Executioner, about Doik and the tool slaying, or S-21. Although you need a strong stomach because lots of horrible things happened at that former school. All right. Thanks a lot.